Here's the full story, read aloud for you. There is one thing that is often misunderstood in football. When a club brings in a large number of new players and allows many of its existing players to leave during the same summer, people usually call it chaos. Too many changes, too many new faces, too many players who need to adapt, too many questions that don't have answers yet. But what if what happened at Bournemouth wasn't actually chaos? What if all those major changes were part of a plan? And more importantly, what if Bournemouth themselves don't want this situation to happen again? This is the story of Bournemouth's summer in 2026. It isn't simply about who arrived, it isn't simply about who left. It's about a club standing at a crossroads. On one side, Bournemouth needed change, but on the other, they also needed stability. And those two things are not always easy to achieve at the same time. The summer of 2026 became an extremely busy period for Bournemouth. A significant number of player movements meant that the squad went through major changes. From the outside, it might have looked like a club completely rebuilding its team, but according to Bruce Sorosi's comments discussed in the report, those changes were viewed as something natural and necessary for Bournemouth's current stage of development. And that sentence is extremely important, because the word natural means Bournemouth did not see the major changes as an accident. They saw them as part of a process, a phase, a period that had to happen. Imagine a football team trying to grow. They have an existing structure. They have players with different roles. They have new requirements. And when those requirements change, the squad has to change as well. That is what appears to be happening at Bournemouth. But there is one major question. How much change is actually necessary? Change is important, but too much change can also become a problem. Imagine you have a football team. Over the course of a season, the players begin to understand each other. They learn how their teammates move. They know when to make a run, when to play a pass, when to defend, when to press. All of that takes time. That is what we call chemistry. And chemistry cannot simply be bought in the transfer market. You can buy a player with incredible individual quality, but you cannot immediately buy an understanding between 11 players. That is the biggest risk of excessive squad turnover. The more players that change, the greater the need to rebuild relationships within the team. And Bournemouth appear to understand that risk. The report indicates that the club is very aware of the impact excessive player turnover can have. And this is where the story becomes even more interesting. Because Bournemouth are not saying that major turnover is something they want to repeat every season. Quite the opposite. There is a hope that this level of change will not become a recurring theme in future seasons. Why? Because Bournemouth wants stability. They want to build a more consistent squad, a group of players that can develop together, a team that doesn't have to be rebuilt from scratch every summer. And this is the major difference between building a squad and building a team. A squad can change, but a team needs continuity. You can replace several players, but if half of the structure changes every season, the process of building chemistry will always start again from zero. Bournemouth appear to want to avoid that cycle. This summer may be a necessary phase, but once this phase is complete, the objective is stability. And this is the part that fans often don't see. When we look at a transfer window, we usually see the numbers. A player arrives, another player leaves, a transfer is announced. Fans celebrate, fans complain. But behind all of those moves is a much bigger question. What is the club actually trying to build? In Bournemouth's case, the report suggests that the significant movement during the summer of 2026 should be viewed as part of the club's development. That means Bournemouth are not simply changing the names inside the squad. They are trying to find the right structure for the long term. And that process is not always visible from the outside. There may be decisions that look strange. There may be changes that make fans question what the club is doing. But if those decisions are designed to create a more consistent structure, then the changes have a purpose. The problem is, a plan like this requires patience, and modern football doesn't always provide patience. Fans want results immediately. The media wants headlines immediately. Clubs want victories immediately. But building a stable squad takes time. And that brings us to the biggest question surrounding Bournemouth. Why does the club hope it won't have to make changes on this scale again? The answer is simple: stability. But stability can be surprisingly difficult to achieve. Football is unpredictable. A player can leave. Another player can arrive. The needs of the team can change. Injuries can change plans. Performances can change priorities. And suddenly, a club can find itself back in the transfer market. That's why building continuity is so difficult. So the real question isn't simply whether Bournemouth made too many changes. The more important question is whether those changes have created the foundation for something more stable. Because a transfer window only lasts for a few months, team building can take years. Bournemouth now have to make sure that the changes made during this summer produce something bigger. They cannot simply ask, who is the next player? They also have to ask, what kind of team are we trying to build? That second question is much harder, because the answer isn't only about individual ability, it is about identity, it is about playing style, it is about character, it is about relationships between players, and it is about consistency. If Bournemouth can create all of those things, then the summer of 2026 could eventually be viewed as a turning point. Not as the summer when too many players changed, but as the summer when Bournemouth completed one phase and began the next. Stability can sound boring, but in football, stability can become a weapon. Imagine two teams with almost the same level of individual quality. The first team changes many players every season. The second team keeps its core together for several years. Which team is more likely to develop chemistry? Probably the second one, because they have something that cannot be purchased in the transfer market: shared experience. They have experienced defeats together. They have experienced victories together. They have faced pressure together. And the longer they play together, the faster they can make decisions on the pitch. That is why continuity matters. Bournemouth don't want every season to become a completely new project. They want to build something that can develop over time. But there is another danger: constant rebuilding. Every time results don't meet expectations, a club makes changes. New players arrive. The system changes. The players have to adapt again. The results still don't improve immediately. And then another round of changes begins. If that cycle continues, a club never really gets the opportunity to establish an identity. That is the danger of excessive turnover. And the Bournemouth report indirectly suggests that the club understands this problem. The changes during the summer of 2026 are considered natural for this particular period. But the long-term goal is different: less turnover, more continuity, more cohesion, and a more consistent squad structure. So, is the summer of 2026 the beginning of something bigger for Bournemouth? Maybe. But the real test won't happen in the transfer market. The real test begins after the transfer window closes, when all the players are inside the squad, when training begins, when matches begin, when the first victory arrives, and when the first defeat arrives. That is when we will discover whether the major changes made during the summer can actually produce something meaningful. Because transfers only create possibilities. What turns those possibilities into success is the work that happens after the transfers. And if there is one major message from this report, it is clear. Bournemouth understand that change is necessary, but they also understand that too much change carries risks. They don't want major turnover to become a habit. They want stability. They want continuity. They want to build a more cohesive squad. And that may be one of the biggest signs that Bournemouth are thinking beyond a single season. They are not only asking, how can we improve the team right now? They are also asking, how can we make this team more stable for the future? So when you look at Bournemouth and see so many changes during the summer of 2026, don't immediately call it chaos, because perhaps what we're actually watching is a reset, a necessary phase, a process of finding a new structure. But the most interesting part isn't how many players changed. The most interesting part is what happens after all those changes are finished. Because Bournemouth themselves hope a summer like this won't become normal every year. They want to stop rebuilding. They want to start maintaining chemistry, maintaining continuity, maintaining identity. And if they succeed, then perhaps several years from now, we will look back at the summer of 2026 and realize something. This summer wasn't the end of a team. It was the beginning of a new structure. Bournemouth aren't simply looking for players. They are looking for stability. They aren't simply building a squad. They are trying to build a team. And in a football world that is constantly changing, perhaps stability is the biggest signing Bournemouth can make.